has considered the arguments made by the attorneys. The court has considered the statements made by the victims in this case. The court's going to find that the plea agreement is fair and reasonable under the circumstances. I want to acknowledge the Rusick family as well as the Watts family that showing mercy on Mr. Watts is understood, and I respect that decision to request that the district attorney not seek the death penalty in this case. And so the court is going to accept this plea bargain under the circumstances. Words that come to mind when I hear the evidence in this case are a senseless crime and the viciousness of the crime. And equally aggravating in this court's determination is the despicable act of disposing of the bodies in the manner in which they were done in this case. I've been a judicial officer now for starting my 17th year, and I could objectively say that this is perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime that I have handled out of the thousands of cases that I have seen. And nothing less than a maximum sentence would be appropriate, and anything less than the maximum sentence would depreciate the seriousness of this offense. So the court is going to sentence Mr. Watts as follows. With regard to count number 1, murder in the first degree as it relates to Shanann Watts, the court is going to sentence you, sir, to a life sentence in the Colorado Department of Corrections, followed, with no possibility of parole. And that is going to run consecutively to all but counts 3 and 4. With regard to count 2, as it relates to murder in the first degree with Bella, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to count number 3, the court is going to sentence you as it relates to Celeste to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to counts 4 and 5 relating to Bella and Celeste as a different theory of first-degree murder, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections, and legally those sentences must run concurrently as a different theory of first-degree murder. Recognizing the unlawful termination of pregnancy for the unborn child that has been named Nico, the court absolutely believes.
It was a quiet Monday morning in Frederick, Colorado, August 13, 2018. The kind of morning that carries no warning, no tremor, no sense that anything is about to shatter. The sun rose over the Rockies, spilling light across neat suburban streets lined with trimmed lawns and pastel houses. But inside one of those homes, a 2-story house on Saratoga Trail, something was terribly wrong. By 8:30 a.m., a close friend, Nicole Atkinson, was pounding on the front door. No answer. The house was still. The car was in the garage, the children's car seats still buckled in place. Shanann Watts, 34 years old and 15 weeks pregnant, was nowhere to be found. Neither were her daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste. Nicole had dropped Shanann off at the house just hours earlier after a late-night business trip. She knew something was off immediately. Shanann had missed a doctor's appointment that morning. She wasn't answering calls or texts. It wasn't like her. Shanann was reliable, a mother devoted to her girls, a woman who planned everything down to the smallest detail. Nicole called the police. When the first officer arrived, the doorbell camera caught his entrance. The home looked immaculate, almost staged. A purse on the counter. A phone wedged between couch cushions. Shoes neatly by the door. But no sign of Sean N., no sound of life. Then came Chris Watts, the husband, the father, pulling into the driveway. He was calm. Too calm. Wearing shorts and a t-shirt, he walked into the house, shaking hands with the officer, explaining that Sean N. might have gone to a friend's place. Maybe she'd taken the kids to cool off after an argument. As bodycam footage rolled, Chris spoke casually, moving from room to room, pointing out missing blankets, missing kids' toys, as though taking inventory rather than searching for his family. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even calling Sean N.'s name. Outside, neighbors watched. The air was heavy, a quiet unease spreading across the street. One neighbor offered his security footage, a motion-triggered camera that faced the Watts driveway. Chris agreed to look. The footage showed Chris backing his truck into the garage early that morning, long before work, something he never did before. The neighbor pointed this out. As the clip ended, Chris folded his arms, shifting from foot to foot. The neighbor's tone grew uneasy. When police asked for his impression, the neighbor said quietly, "He's not acting right. He's never like that." That was the first tremor. By the afternoon, the missing persons case was spreading through social media. Photos of Sean N. and her daughters filled screens, smiling faces, family trips, birthday parties, the picture of happiness. But behind those smiles, there were secrets. The perfect life on Facebook masked something darker brewing inside the Watts household. Investigators soon learned that Sean N. had returned home at 1:48 a.m. from a business trip to Arizona. By 5:27 a.m., neighbors' cameras recorded Chris backing his work truck up to the garage. By 7 a.m., he was gone. Sean N.'s phone, wedding ring, and purse were still inside. Something had happened in those hours, something that would turn a missing persons report into one of the most haunting family murders in modern American history. The small town of Frederick, population just over 13,000, wasn't used to crime scenes or media trucks. But within 24 hours, the Watts home became the center of a storm. Police tape went up. News cameras arrived. The story spread, pregnant mother and 2 daughters missing. Husband pleads for their return. Chris Watts appeared on local television the next day. Standing on his porch, arms folded across his chest, he looked into the camera and said he just wanted his family back. His voice cracked, almost convincingly, but his eyes were dry. Behind him, the house loomed like an empty shell. Viewers around the world would later remember that interview, the way he swayed, the lack of tears, the way his words didn't match his expression. At that moment, no one knew that the man begging for his family's safe return already knew they were never coming home. As the sun set that day, search teams combed the nearby fields. Drones swept the sky. Officers knocked on doors, asked neighbors for footage, tracked phone records, digital pings, anything that could lead to Sean N. and the girls. But there were no signs of life. No sightings. No calls. No movement. It was as if the Watts women had vanished into thin air. The next 48 hours would tear apart the illusion of suburban perfection and expose the cold, methodical destruction of an entire family, a crime not driven by impulse, but by something colder, calculation, desire, and a desperate need for control. The investigation was only beginning, but for the detective standing outside 2825 Saratoga Trail, the unease was unmistakable. Something inside that house didn't add up. And before the week was over, the truth would shake the world. Before the headlines, before the cameras, before the word monster was ever spoken, there was just a family. A young couple building a life together, a picture of the American dream in a quiet Colorado suburb. Sean and Catherine Rozusek was born in New Jersey in 1984, raised in North Carolina. She was driven, passionate, and fiercely independent, a woman who had faced hardship and refused to break. In her 20s, she battled lupus, an autoimmune disease that left her exhausted, aching, and uncertain about her future. But instead of letting it define her, she turned it into motivation. She found success in a health and wellness business called Lovell, selling Thrive supplements and coaching others to do the same. Her social media presence was radiant, videos of gratitude, encouragement, and joy. Behind every post was a woman determined to turn pain into purpose. Shannon lived for her daughters, Bella and Celeste, and she adored being a mother. Her friends described her as meticulous, nurturing, and deeply protective of her family. In 2010, she met Chris Watts. Chris seemed like the perfect match, quiet, kind, and soft-spoken. He worked as an operator at Anadarko Petroleum, steady and reliable. Where Shannon was outgoing and talkative, Chris was calm and reserved. She often joked that she had to break him out of his shell. Friends said she brought color into his world, he brought steadiness into hers. They married in 2012 and moved to Frederick, Colorado, a place where dreams felt safe. For a while, it seemed like everything was falling into place. 2 daughters followed soon after, Bella Marie and Celeste Catherine. To the outside world, the Watts family appeared flawless. Shannon's Facebook page documented every milestone, family vacations, anniversaries, birthdays. Smiling faces under Colorado sunsets. But beneath those perfect snapshots was the subtle erosion of something essential. Financial stress was mounting. The couple had filed for bankruptcy in 2015. Their beautiful new home came with a heavy mortgage, and medical bills added more strain. Chris worked long hours in the oil fields. Shannon, though successful in her business, often traveled for work. Friends noticed the tension. The sparkle in their marriage seemed to fade. But online, Shannon kept up the image of harmony, an ideal family life she was determined to believe in. By 2018, cracks were widening. Shannon became pregnant again, a baby boy they planned to name Nico. She was thrilled. But those close to her began to notice something different about Chris. He had become distant. Detached. He stopped initiating affection. He was quieter, withdrawn. During her summer business trips, Shannon confided in friends that she felt something was wrong. "I don't know who he is anymore," she wrote in a message to one of them. She felt him slipping away. When she took the girls to North Carolina for several weeks that summer to visit family, the distance between them grew into something else, silence. Chris rarely called. He avoided conversations. And when Shannon tried to reach him emotionally, his responses were cold, measured, and empty. While Shannon was across the country trying to save her marriage, Chris Watts was beginning an affair. Her name was Nicole Kessinger, a co-worker at Anadarko Petroleum. Intelligent, athletic, and independent, Nicole met Chris in June of 2018. He told her he was in the final stages of a divorce, that his marriage was ending. They started seeing each other regularly. Weekends, lunches, hotel rooms. Chris, who once described himself as shy and reserved, suddenly came alive. He changed his diet, started working out obsessively, buying new clothes, a man remaking himself for someone new. Nicole later told investigators that she believed he was separated. But the truth was that Chris was leading 2 lives, one of a loving father and husband on Facebook, and another of secret texts and hidden phone calls under the cover of darkness. Back in North Carolina, Shannon could feel it. In messages to friends, she wrote about her fears. She noticed his lack of affection, his distance. She even wondered if there was someone else. But she remained hopeful. She believed they could fix it. She refused to give up on the family they'd built. In early August, Shannon returned home briefly before another business trip. She planned to confront Chris when she got back. She wanted to save their marriage, for her daughters, for her unborn son. But Chris wasn't thinking about saving anything. By then, he was deep in a web of deception, consumed by a fantasy of a new life, one free from responsibility, free from the family he once promised to protect. Behind every smile in Shanann's videos, there were questions she couldn't answer. Behind every casual, "love you," in Chris's texts, there was a secret he was already burying. As the summer came to an end, two stories were colliding, one of devotion and hope, and one of detachment and deceit. On the surface, the Watts family looked whole. But inside, something had already begun to die. And soon, it would become clear just how far Chris Watts was willing to go to make his secret life real. The summer of 2018 was the beginning of the end. While friends saw Facebook posts of smiling daughters and a glowing pregnant mother, the real story was unfolding quietly, in text messages, in cold silences, and in a heavy space between two people who were supposed to be in love. Shanann felt it before anyone else. She noticed the way Chris no longer reached for her hand. The way his texts had grown shorter, emptier. The way his eyes looked past her instead of at her. When she asked what was wrong, he gave vague answers. "I just need space. I'm tired. Work's been rough." But the truth was far more complicated. Chris Watts wasn't just pulling away, he was transforming. Those around him noticed the changes too. He'd lost weight, started dressing differently, working out constantly, and caring more about his appearance than ever before. His co-workers saw him smile more often, laugh more freely. He looked alive, but not for the family he had at home. The morning of August 13, 2018, began like any other in the quiet suburb of Frederick, Colorado. But inside the Watts home, the stillness masked something unimaginable. At 1:48 a.m., Shanann Watts returned home from her business trip. She unlocked the front door, stepped quietly inside, and set down her suitcase. The house was silent. Upstairs, her husband waited. At some point between 2 o'clock and 5 a.m., everything changed. What happened next would later be pieced together through confessions, evidence, and forensic timelines, fragments of truth from a night consumed by darkness. Investigators believe Shanann confronted Chris about the state of their marriage, about his affair, and about their future. She wanted to repair what was broken. He wanted to erase it. At 5:27 a.m., neighbors' surveillance footage caught Chris backing his work truck into the driveway, an action he'd never done before. The truck's tailgate faced the garage. Inside the house, Shanann and the girls were already gone. Chris later confessed that he strangled Shanann in their bedroom while she was 15 weeks pregnant with their son, Nico. When the crime was done, he wrapped her in a sheet from their bed. Then, in a moment that defies human comprehension, he turned to his daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3. They were awake. They had seen too much. He told them their mother was sick. Chris loaded Shanann's body into the back of his truck, then placed his daughters beside her, alive. He drove for nearly an hour to a remote oil site owned by his company, a desolate patch of land surrounded by empty fields and rusting machinery. There, in the isolation of Weld County, Chris Watts carried out the unthinkable. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave, then placed his daughters into 2 separate oil tanks. By sunrise, he was driving home. He texted co-workers. He called Shanann's phone, leaving voicemails as if she'd simply vanished. Then he left for work, pretending that life was normal, while the people he was supposed to love most lay hidden in the dirt and oil fields of Colorado. By mid-morning, when police arrived for a welfare check, Chris was already playing the role of the worried husband. But the cracks began to show almost immediately. His story didn't fit. His body language screamed unease. As detectives began reviewing footage, tracking cell data, and analyzing his movements, they would soon realize that the man searching for his missing family wasn't a desperate husband, he was a killer hiding in plain sight. That morning marked the end of the Watts family, and the beginning of one of the most disturbing investigations in American true crime history. In November 2018, 3 months after the murders, Chris Watts chose to plead guilty to all charges. The decision was part of an agreement with prosecutors, a plea deal to spare him from execution. It was a deal his own family supported, believing that another death would not bring peace. When the judge asked if he understood the gravity of his choice, Chris said yes. His voice was quiet, steady, emotionless. On November 19, the courtroom fell silent as the sentence was read. Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life terms, 3 consecutive and 2 concurrent, without the possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars in a maximum security prison. As the sentence was handed down, Shannan's family sat together in grief and disbelief. They spoke through tears, remembering Shannan as a loving daughter and devoted mother who had given everything to her family. They spoke of Bella and Celeste, bright, innocent, joyful little girls whose laughter once filled that house in Frederick. Chris did not turn to look at them. He showed no emotion. Only silence. When he was led away in shackles, the image of him in that courtroom marked the final act of a tragedy that had already stolen so much, a man who destroyed everything he was meant to protect, all for a fantasy that never existed. In the years since the tragedy, the story has continued to haunt millions, not because of the brutality alone, but because it shattered the illusion of safety. It forced us to confront a terrifying question. How well do we really know the people we love? Today, Chris Watts sits in a cell in Wisconsin, serving 5 life sentences, alone with his silence, his memories, and the echoes of the lives he ended. Meanwhile, Shannan's legacy lives on through her family. Through the people who refuse to let her story fade. Through the reminder that love and light can exist even in the darkest places. In the end, the house on Saratoga Trail is no longer just a crime scene. It's a symbol of everything that was lost, a warning that darkness can thrive in the most ordinary lives, hiding in plain sight until it's too late to stop. And as the cameras fade and the headlines move on, one question still lingers in the quiet spaces left behind. What makes a person like Chris Watts, a father, a husband, a neighbor, capable of such unthinkable evil? This has been Dark Matters True Crime. If this story moved you, or if it made you think, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories that dive beneath the surface, into the shadows where truth and darkness collide. And as always, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, evil often hides where you least expect it.